Good evening and welcome to another episode of History Done Right. This is episode number 2 in our recently started series on Monday nights. This is a podcast presented by Bradford Christian College. Link to the website for Bradford Christian College is in the description below. Please do visit Bradford Christian College website, contact them for information and a number of bachelor degrees offered, also a Master of Arts in Theology offered there. And you might find that um, that would be a good choice for you. Um, it is an online college, but it's not a program that you're just left alone to find your way through. You're assigned a mentor who walks with you through the program, has regular scheduled meetings with the students. In those meetings, can answer questions students might have, can challenge students with further thinking beyond the immediate subject, application of principles being learned and such. Um, and so you really have somebody to walk with you and make sure that um, everything in your selected program is going the way that you would like and is going in a way that's best for you in your learning. So please do check out bradfordchristiancollege.com. This is our Monday night podcast or whatever it's called. Um, we also have a Tuesday night podcast, The Lantern's Quest, currently working through the Gospel of Mark, exploring the sketchbook of Christ. Um, and pastors David Barrett and Lucas Bombach join me on Tuesday nights. On Wednesdays, we have our midweek study where um, I selfishly use that as an opportunity to read through my stack of stuff. And you get to follow along and hopefully be encouraged, inspired, and instructed by what we're looking at on Wednesday nights. On Friday nights, um, we have what we call our random cast, and who knows what's going to show up on Friday night because it's random. And generally, the idea is to look at current events and current news articles and try to frame a biblical response to those. But tonight, it's history done right. And so we want to get into our second episode of History Done Right. Last week, as we began, um, we tried to set out what we called foundation stones for doing history right. And the foundation stones we looked at, I'll pull up my fancy graphic here. Foundation stone one, that the God of the Bible is the creator of all things that exist, just as recorded in the Bible. You'll have to watch the previous episode if you want to know what those lines mean right there. I'm not going to explain them now. Um, Go watch the previous episode and you'll find out what those lines mean right there. But Foundation Stone 1 says that to do history right, we're going to hold to the truth that the God of the Bible is the creator of all things. He is the one who brought all things into existence and established the beginning of history as we know it. It also means that we hold the Bible in high regard as the book, all capital letters, by way of eminence. It is the book. It is the book from which we derive our standards of faith and our standards of action. It also happens to be the book that records the earliest history for us that no other history work can record. The second foundation stone was what we call a providential view of history, and that is the view that God is active in caring for, superintending over his creation, and that nothing happens without his awareness, his notice, and his allowance approval. Okay. Um, There's no, as one minister would say, there's no rogue molecules or rogue atoms out there doing their own thing apart from God's sovereign providential ruling over all things. And we spent a good deal of time reading from a work titled The Ancient History of the Egyptians, Carthaginians, Assyrians, Babylonians, Medes, and Persians, and Macedonians by Charles Rollins. Now, um, he actually wrote that, as I can tell, he wrote that before 1740. We were reading from a work that was published in 1875. So there you are, 130 years later, roughly. And his textbook is being used, right? And so a couple of things. Number one, it was an exploration into um, how history used to be viewed by authors of history texts, this providential view that comes through clearly. If you want to know that, well, watch last week's episode. You can follow along um, as we read through that. But also to realize that the children of this country were immersed in a providential view of history in their early education. And to think how, um, that's who we were, who we are, who we should be as a country. That our education should be rooted in a providential view of all things. And it was. We saw that as we read that history textbook, and we're going to do more of that tonight. Tonight, we're going to read more about this providential view of history, and we're going to see that um, it runs throughout a number of different textbooks from those years, and it reflects the manner of education. I just want you to imagine that there was a time in this country where, as a child, you could go to church on Sunday and you'd be in Sunday school and you would hear the Sunday school lesson, and it would be filled with the history that the Bible informs us of, and it would be frameworked with the sovereignty of God and God working out his plan and God in charge of history and God directing the events as he sees fit. Um, Maybe the sermon on Sunday, those elements would come through of acknowledging God's sovereignty over all things, his providence, his plans for history as he works to show forth his glory. Um, and then you'd go home on Sunday, and Sunday night would come, and you'd go to bed and you'd think, well, tomorrow I have to get up and go to school. And you get up and you go to school, and your teacher says, let's take out our history books, and you begin reading together, and your history book at school is reinforcing a view of history that you learned on Sunday. And for the next 5 days, Monday through Friday, that view of history is being reinforced at school. And that's the way it used to be, and that's the way it should be. Um, that's the way it should be. So we're going to continue to look at um, some early history textbooks from this country that show forth this providential view of history, show forth the idea that the God of the Bible is the creator of all things and that we can rely upon the Bible as a trustworthy source um, for whatever we're studying. And to begin with, we're going to look at a book called Ancient History from the Creation to the Fall of Rome, published 1847, written by S.G. Goodrich. And we're going to read a portion of this book, and we'll bring it up here so you can follow along. We'll need to big this up so that it's visible. Let's see, I think I can close this, and there we go. So, an ancient history for the use of schools. Very interesting. Chapter 1, History, its meaning and uses. Let's see, does this, yeah, we'll hide the controls somewhat. All right. History, it says here, is a record of past events. Its province is to present us with a detail of human transactions and to trace the course of Providence as manifested toward mankind. Like, we're at the second sentence of our history book, and already, I mean, look, I understand. There would be those certainly today that, well, they're not talking about God, the God of the Bible here. They're just using this impersonal term, providence. Let me take you to Webster's 1828. um, Let me read the definition of providence from Webster's 1828. Yeah, drag this over here so it's a little more convenient for me. All right. Providence, the act of providing or preparing for future use or application. Gives a sentence here, providence for war is the best prevention of it. Now little used. So we don't, in Webster's day, providence wasn't used that way. Foresight, timely care, particularly active foresight or foresight accompanied with the procurement of what is necessary for future use or with suitable preparation. How many of the troubles and perplexities of life proceed from want of providence? All right. So you see that the word providence um, doesn't have to mean God. I mean, here it's talking about a person can exercise providence and exercise foresight and timely care. And in fact, doing that can actually um, lead to avoiding many troubles and perplexities, right? It's kind of like, oh, it's cloudy. I'll take my umbrella, perchance it might rain, right? And I can, um, that foresight can actually help me, right? Number three definition in theology, the care and superintendence which God exercises over his creatures. He that acknowledges a creation and denies a providence involves himself in a palpable contradiction. For the same power which caused a thing to exist is necessary to continue its existence. Some persons admit a general providence, but deny a particular providence, not considering that a general providence consists of particulars. A belief in divine providence is a source of great consolation to good men. Okay. Now that's a great sentence and it deserves some time, right? A belief in divine providence. Well, let me read the sentence that follows because it even clarifies. By divine providence is often understood God himself. Right? So a belief in divine providence, a belief in God himself is a source of great consolation to good men, right? Now, how does somebody become a good man, right? How do you become good? Well, you don't become good in and of yourself, right? You become good through the regeneration by the Holy Spirit, right? Um, we call it salvation, right? That's how you become good. And the great consolation is that in divine providence, this regeneration came to you, even in spite of the intentions of your heart or inclinations of your heart. You pick the right word there. Um, but that's pretty cool. So by divine providence is often understood God himself, right? So what are we to understand by a capitalized word providence? I'm going to argue we understand God himself. And so, I don't know if you have ever, in any history class you ever took in school, you were presented with this idea that the boundaries, the province, that which makes up a study of history is one, following human transactions through history, just human events, right? Human interactions, um, and tracing the course of providence as manifested toward mankind. Do we do that? Do we trace the course of providence? If we don't, we're not doing history. It continues, and to deduce from these such general views and principles as may guide us in seeking the path of duty and happiness. Right. So there's happiness again, right? Again, we don't understand happiness the way our founding fathers and the early generations of this country understood happiness, right? I get a bowl of ice cream and I say I'm happy. Okay. That's not what life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness wasn't about. It wasn't about pursuing bowls of ice cream. Okay. This is a legal term, it's a theological term. To be happy was to know that you were at peace with God. How do you know that you're at peace with God? Well, through the saving work of Jesus Christ, and you know that the family you've been adopted into, the father of that family is smiling at you as you walk that path of duty. And, this is laid out for us in scripture clearly. But this author is saying it's also laid out for us in history. And of course, much of scripture is what? Right. The principle of curiosity implanted in the breast leads the enlightened mind. Let's see if I can, again, big this up here. Okay, what's happening? There we go. Lead the enlightened mind to inquire into the past and to dwell with peculiar interest upon the great deeds which have been achieved in other days. And this interest seems to be quickened as the scene of action recedes into the depths of antiquity, just as the eye gazes with more intensity and delight upon a landscape over which twilight or distance has thrown its enchantment, right? So the fascination with old history, right? All right, number three, as providence has implanted in the human breast a propensity to explore new regions in order that the whole earth may be known and occupied. So, this desire to search into the past seems designed to preserve the records of our race, which otherwise had slumbered in the wreck of bygone years. All right, so our interest in history, our interest in exploration, right? That adventuresome spirit, which maybe we don't see as much of today, but there certainly was a time. You go back to the time of Christopher Columbus, and there was a explosion of adventurism. You go to the late 1800s into the early 1900s, there was another explosion of adventurism. Um, but this history author is saying, well, that's Providence that has done that, right? So Providence, this isn't an impersonal force out there, right? Um, this author's not saying that there's something impersonal or something like fate or what have you that has done this thing. It's a very personal thing because Providence has reached into the heart and mind of man. I don't know, through some kind of creative act, maybe, and placed this there. Number four, the study of history is interesting in the first place because it gratifies the instinctive curiosity to which we have alluded, right? So I know a lot of students have said, well, history was the most boring subject, and that's unfortunate. And maybe a lot of the responsibility lands on teachers for that. I don't know. Um, but history should be anything but boring, and it becomes not boring when you have a proper view of history. And the proper view is that God is working out his plan through history. And then as you study history, you're trying to see that plan. You're trying to see those moments that expose clearly God's providential hand at work in history. And in the second place, because it is the great storehouse of human experience from the beginning of the world to the present time. Right. So, um, how did we get where we are? Right? What happened to bring us to this place in history? The study of this is therefore calculated to furnish an agreeable relaxation to the mind, while it extends the range of knowledge, multiplies the resources of thought, and gives strength and clearness to the judgment. Right. So now our author is saying there's a whole lot of benefits that come to a person, right? Um, Extending the range of knowledge, right? Perhaps you said this, maybe I said this. Um, I've certainly had students who have said this. Well, why do I need to know this? Why do I have to study this? When will I ever use this in the future? Now, there's a whole lot of issues with such a statement. Um, you know, like the presumption to know what your future holds. And so right now, you apparently you're saying you know everything that you'll need to know for your future. At least you know the list of things you need to learn for your future, which is a little bit presumptuous. The arrogance of youth, right? Um, but generally speaking, extending the range of knowledge is never a bad thing. If you think about tools in the tool chest, it's not a bad thing to accumulate a tool that you end up rarely using, but it certainly is valuable at that moment, right? So multiplies the resources of thought. Okay, see, now I wish that I had that in my arsenal when students bring this up. But when will I ever have to use this? And I could say, well, are you going to be thinking in the future? Yes. All right. To think, you need resources, and studying history multiplies those resources of thought. It gives strength and clearness to the judgment. That's a wonderful last sentence in that paragraph 4, I guess it is. It's a wonderful last sentence, and my guess is you could apply this to any area of study, right? So for the student who's studying anything and thinking, why do I have to learn this? Well, here's our general rule for why we study things. Number 5, that we may have a more particular view of the nature and uses of history, let us recall to mind the observations we have made upon human life in the town or village where we have dwelt. These observations, with the deductions we have made therefrom, are history, though on a minute scale. We have here learned something of the vices and virtues, the weakness and strength, the wisdom and folly which belong to human nature, and are thus better qualified to understand ourselves and mankind. Well, there you go. You become a better discerner of human nature. What are the qualities that we see expressed in human nature? Well, that we learn that through history, and that becomes something that we can use in our present day. Such knowledge is eminently useful to us in the everyday business of life and enables us to steer clear of dangers which beset us and to secure and cherish such advantages as fall within our reach. Okay, so there's a very practical reason for the study of history. Um, we'll continue on. History on a larger scale gives us similar knowledge and imparts similar benefits, though of a still higher and more important character. In its pages, we may contemplate the master spirits of our race upon the theater of human action and study the great drama of kings and kingdoms, of thrones and empires, of nations and dynasties. Right? This is where we can learn the big stuff, right? Things that are go beyond like the routine things of life. We can see kings and kingdoms rising, and we can see those same kings and kingdoms falling um, by God's providence. You know, um, many people today would be very taken with some epic movie that, shows a sweep of history. Well, perhaps based on a true story, right? Um, when you study history, you're getting the true epic sweep of history as you see these kingdoms rise and fall and interact with each other, and the great efforts that powerful people go to try to secure even more power to themselves, and you can see them fall in a web of their own devices. We've just been in a Reformation history class that I'm teaching. We've just been reading about that circumstance for a particular individual who manipulated. In fact, this individual manipulated circumstances and facilitated divorces so that a family member can marry a particular person that can give his family member a prominent place and such. And he makes all these different moves, and it ends up leading to a war that leads to the death of hundreds of thousands of people. And there's a huge number of lessons to be learned in that, um, clearly. But that's not um, boring. That's highly instructive. And while we thus gaze upon these outward spectacles, we look into the very bosoms of the actors, and whatever mask they wear, whatever character they pretend to play, we may clearly see the true workings of their souls. History, then, is a mirror reflecting human life and human character. And whoever would know the world should deeply ponder its revelations. Our personal intercourse with men teaches us the character of individuals. Our experience in a particular community throws some light upon human society. But to sound all its depths as displayed in peace and war and prosperity and adversity and barbarism and civilization in different climates and under the influence of different governments and religions, the accumulated records of history are indispensable. If an individual cared only for himself, the study of history would still be useful, as it would furnish him with exhaustless materials for reflection, and greatly increase his powers in dealing with his fellow men. But when we consider that in these United States, the business of government falls into the hands of the people, and as government can only be understood by means of the light afforded by history, an acquaintance with it becomes to all of us, according to our ability, an imperious duty. Okay, so that's very informative as to how um, the study of history was understood in years that we could look at as the foundation or the forming of this this country. That the present day performance, activity, carrying on of government responsibilities is affected by the understanding of history of those people that are now in those offices. There is perhaps, okay, now this perhaps here is not the author. I'm not sure about this, right? This is a technique that's used to draw the attention of the reader, right? The perhaps here is let me get your attention and I want you to contemplate whether or not there is even a higher view of the uses of history. For it is one of the chief means of instructing us in the ways of providence and of teaching us our relation to the author of life and light. In a world where man is free to act as he will, it is still obvious that there are certain laws in the moral as well as the natural world, and that masses of matter are no more responsible to the principle of gravitation than the human soul to the laws of virtue. Okay, science has worked hard, I think, to change the views of masses of matter are no more responsible to the principle of gravitation, right? Because I think there's some, you know, law of gravitation or something that has to do with the mass of the two objects and their distance from each other or whatever. I mean, I say whatever because it's a descriptor, right? But I think everybody admits that we're not really sure what gravity is. In fact, there are those that posit there really is no gravity and it's all magnetic and not this thing called gravity. Maybe those are flat earthers. I don't know. But the point is, there are what we could call laws of nature, right? In fact, we're so confident of what we call the law of gravity that when I'm holding a hammer, I don't have to let go of that hammer to convince myself that gravity is still at work. I know, even without letting go, that that hammer is going to fall to the earth. um, but see, this providential view of history says, and ultimately, that principle of gravitation is um, providence at work, right? In Jesus Christ, God is holding all things together. And I would say ultimately that's why we don't fly off the earth as it's spinning so quickly. Um, and surely um, we've figured out at this point that if we look at the human soul to try to find the laws of virtue, we're truly lost in that regard. Let's see what our author says. This is proved by the accumulated evidence of ages, and the moral governor of the world is thus as clearly revealed as the author of nature. If history can make us better acquainted with him, his plans and purposes, how sublime are the lessons it imparts. Okay, so back to the beginning of this paragraph, right? The perhaps there is not, well, I, as your author, I'm not sure about this. The perhaps there is to capture your attention, right? Is to say, consider this as the higher view of the uses of history. And what is he saying? Well, the higher view is that as we study history, why do I have to study this? Well, as we study history, we should be getting to know God better. We should understand more about his character. And as we understand more about his character, we understand his um, laws, particularly his laws of virtue, which will make us better people, right? And this virtue that's being talked about here, this isn't just happenstance, okay? Um, this would still be a time where George Washington, even though no longer with them at this time of this text, would be beloved. And one saying of Washington's that everybody would know is it is impossible to have morality without virtue and to have virtue without religion. And it's the Christian religion that instructs us in virtue. And for Washington, what he was arguing is that's what's necessary for our communities, our country, our states, our government to continue to operate properly. The issues that we think we have with our Constitution today are not because the Constitution is poorly written. It's because we've become a people of really poor character. We've moved far away from the Christian character that is necessary for that Constitution to operate properly. Okay, one more paragraph here. History may be of several kinds. Particular or local history treats only of a portion of the world, as England, France, or the United States. Universal history embraces the world at large from the earliest records to the present time. And we could spend some time thinking about why we would want to call it universal history and not world history. Um, but yeah, so there we have it. This textbook, um, right? A good old American textbook, history book that from the very first would instruct the students that the higher view of the uses of history is being instructed in the ways of providence, the ways of God. And talk about an opportunity to be strengthened in, for young students, what would be a very young faith, and growing in their trust in the character of God, right? Because it could be confirmed for them. Oh, sure, we read about God in the Old Testament doing things, but that's, Bible, right? That's Bible stories. Well, what if we keep studying history and we get out of Old Testament times and past the New Testament history, and we're still seeing the same acts of providence, the consistent acts of God to bring about um, new kings and take down old kings and what have you. And we're just continually reminded of the trustworthy character of the God of the Bible. It's pretty powerful. Well, let's look at another text here. This is An Universal History by this guy, Hebe, Hebe-Gebe. I don't know, Hebe here. Um, let's see. I guess we're on the one-page view. We'll big this up. Let's see if we can get a 1895, maybe. That seems maybe that's when it was gifted to um, the Harvard College Library. 1848 is when this was published. This is Volume 1, Ancient History by G.C. Hebe. Hebe? It's titled An Universal History in a Series of Letters, being a complete and impartial narrative of the most remarkable events of all nations from the earliest period to the present time, forming a complete history of the world. All right. Let's see how he starts his textbook. Again, 1848. We'll start with this paragraph right here. The bold censures I have passed upon the prejudices and superstitions of mankind, the severity with which I have treated the disgraceful artifices and ridiculous pretensions of princes, priests, and aristocrats, together with my vindication of the people's right and of the free sway of their reasoning faculties, cannot but raise many enemies against this work and its author. Whoa, he's sensing a little conflict here, right? Because he's taking a particular view and approach, and he's saying, look, there's a bunch of disgraceful artifices, right? Artifices would be efforts against what he's saying, the ridiculous pretensions of these important people. These reflections, with the importance and sublimity of the work itself, has at times made me doubt the propriety of offering my thoughts to the public. But convinced that my readers will find that I have had the promulgation of truth for my chief object, and that no pusillanimous fear of human enmity and criticism has prevented me from uttering that which I deemed would promote the true interests of my fellow men. I flatter myself with the hope that the lovers of truth will acknowledge that my labor has not been in vain. Okay, we'll stop there because that's getting to be a lengthy sentence. We got to know what this word means that I can't even pronounce. I'm sure you know what it means, and so, you can tell me in the comments or whatever um, what the word actually means. I'm looking it up in my Webster's 1828. Uh, pusillanimous, pusillanimous, destitute of that strength and firmness of mind which constitutes courage, bravery, and fortitude. Okay, it is a bad word, right? It's a thing that you don't want to be described as pusillanimous. Pusillanimous. All right. So he flatters himself with the hope that the lovers of truth will acknowledge that his labor has not been in vain. And what does he say next? And that history, from the point of view I have represented her, will afford to mankind the strongest evidence of God's providential care, inspire us with the greatest confidence in his wisdom and goodness, fill our hearts with love and gratitude towards him, and at the same time, give us a clear insight into the means by which man can attain more general happiness. There's that word again, happiness, during his terrestrial existence, by proving that the attainment of this great end depends chiefly upon himself. My guess is that you never sat in a history class and at whatever level, and your teacher, instructor, professor, whomever said at the start of the year, and finally, students, it would be my hope that as we work through this history class, you will come to see the strongest evidence of God's providential care, that you'd be inspired with the greatest confidence in his wisdom and goodness. Your hearts would be filled with love and gratitude towards him. I mean, um, come on, our history classes today, it would seem to be they're meant to create in us cynicism, right? Um, that you don't have students walking out of history classes today saying, um, I am so filled with so much love and thankfulness to God after that history class, right? The questions that come out today are, how could a loving God possibly let that sort of thing happen in history, right? That's what comes out today. But this author, his hope that he flatters himself with is that students who really want truth would come out of reading his works on history with a great love and thankfulness to God. Man, I wish I had these words, when students, well, why do we have to study this? Because you need to grow in your love and gratitude towards God. All right. Let's see what else he has to say here. That was his preface to his book, right? This would be like day one in your history class. Your teacher would say, everybody pull out your Hebe. And however you pronounce his name, I shouldn't make fun of it. Heavy, I don't know. But and let's read the preface. Johnny, stand up and read that paragraph. And tears come to his eyes as he reads, that studying history from Hebe is going to bring about this great confidence in God's wisdom and goodness, and his heart's going to be, do you get the idea? All right. Biographical sketches. Here's some of the authors referenced in this book, all the greats that probably we don't know. This would be a great list right here to um, add to a reading list. Right? The reading list never stops growing. But I mean, if that's what Hebe thought to read to build his history, then probably be good to read as well. All right, let's get to the beginning here. Letter one, Introduction to the Study of History. All right. The study of history is the most fitting nourishment to promote the growth and strength of the expanding intellect of youth. Okay, there you go. There's another sentence that you could put down in your commonplace book, right? Why study history? Because it's nourishment to promote the growth and strength of the expanding intellect of youth. It's kind of, it sounds kind of like why you should eat your vegetables, right? um, the sports of childhood and the convivialities of youth we may cheerfully and innocently enjoy during their proper season. The joys of innocence and the playful words of pure lips leave to the future no bitter regrets. But as the vernal days of life are short, let us enjoy their golden hours and gather the flowers that bloom beneath their sunny rays, not forgetting to cultivate the fields that during the summer heat are to bring forth the fruits, so that when the chilly days of autumn and the snows of winter shall have come, we may enjoy a rich recompense in place of the transient gifts of the spring. Wow, that's never thought I would read words like that in a history book, right? Time is precious, and bitter will be our regret should the days of our youth have been spent without enriching our minds with something of the knowledge of God and of the human race, which is hoarded in the lap of history. But having acquired this treasure, which neither the misfortune nor the power of man can deprive us of, we shall feel amply rewarded for our labor, not only by a superior knowledge of human affairs, but also from a conviction that the hand of Providence leads mankind towards a glorious destiny. Wait a minute. What? I missed that in my history classes. Isn't that, I mean, isn't that encouraging? Doesn't it, do you understand that when you read things like this in your history book, that it raises your eyes to see something better than all the misfortunes of men through history, right? The reminiscences of our childhood are feeble. So is the light which history casts upon the cradle of the human race. But as the mists of ignorance are dispersed, a clearer light appears until, amid the splendor of the noonday's sun, we discern the hand of our Heavenly Father and recognize with grateful hearts the wisdom and goodness of the plan He has prescribed for the advancement of mankind towards civilization and perfection. Now, look, some of you who view this video whenever may be so bold as to make the decision that you will teach your children at home. You'll be a crazy radical and engage in homeschooling. And if that's a decision that you're making and you have questions about it, please post a comment, ask a question. I'll be glad to provide, what advice I can provide, having homeschooled and worked with homeschooling families for, well, good grief, I don't even want to say how many years I've done it. But I would suggest to you, and I mean, and this suggestion I think is applicable to anybody who's wanting to pick up a book that is history. From now on, let's pick up our history books whenever we read history and let us have this intention in mind that by the time I'm through reading this history, I will discern the hand of my heavenly Father and recognize with a grateful heart his wisdom and goodness of the plan he prescribed for the advancement of mankind through this history. I mean, I know that we can look at recent history, current times, and we can think, oh, things have never been worse than they are now, right? And we can think that. But at the same time, you have to acknowledge that in many ways, things have never been better than they are now. I mean, there are many things about our civilization and our standard of living and opportunities and things that are available to us that um, nobody before has ever had. I mean, you think about who we classify as poor in this country, and I don't want anybody to be poor, but who we classify as the poor in this country, oftentimes those people have an actual house to live in. They have more than one car. They probably have more than one TV. Everybody has a cell phone. I mean, you think about that's poverty. Like, what are you talking about? In the history of the world, and even for many places today, um, that's not poor. I mean, good grief. Most of the poor in this country, right? They have running water in their house, right? They have a toilet that flushes. In that regard, they're better off than many kings who ever lived in this earth. I mean, let's get some perspective. And yeah, um, there are certainly days where in contemporary history where things seem to be waxing worse. But maybe there's a general trend. Maybe if we step back and we look at the bigger picture, there's a general trend of an advancement of mankind towards civilization and perfection, maybe. Many persons deem history too grave and serious a goddess for their devotion. And instead of cultivating her graces and adorning their minds with the inestimable treasures showered upon her votaries, they while away their time with the gay damsels who surround her throne, known under the general name of novels. Yeah. Not going to an actual history text to learn history, but going to a historical novel and saying, "Oh, now I know the real history." What? Still, the real merits of the few of these inferior divinities who can justly boast the noble parentage, pure morals, and even elevated principles can bear no comparison with those of history. Besides, the most of them are seductive sirens who fair in appearance utter from their lips enchanting words while their breath is poisonous and destructive. All right. So our author here is making his plea, his pitch. Let's read true history. Let's not read. I mean, historical novels. I'm assuming he'd say, that could be an enjoyable read, but don't pretend like you're doing true history. Don't pretend like you're doing history right by just reading historical novels. Although it must be conceded that the study of history appears grave and serious at the first view, yet from my own experience, I venture to assert that upon a close examination, we will find her beauty irresistible and soon become enamored of her. Yea, when you shall have made yourselves acquainted with her most excellent endowments, which are at first hidden from your sight, she will be the constant object of your dearest thoughts. Fictitious writers allow themselves to deviate from truth, while the great end and aim of history is to represent man and his actions in true colors, right? So he is building his contrast between true history and fictional history, or we could say the historical novel. Okay. Yet in days gone by, some of her most gifted lovers, and who in all other respects were worthy of her favors, have sullied their own renown and tarnished her fair reputation by bequeathing to posterity gilded falsehoods, by flattering tyrants and slandering the wise and the good. All right, so our author is concerned about some students who, in um, some pretended history textbooks, apparently, tyrants are flattered and the wise and the good are slandered. Well, that sort of thing would never happen, right? You would never come to a time in the history of a particular country, for example, where um, men who did good and great things in the history of the country and to establish it and to strengthen it and we're certainly not perfect by any means, but um, the tenor of their life was for some was tremendous personal sacrifice to the building of the country, and you would never hear those men slandered in more modern times, right? You would never have a time where those statues would be taken down, right? And present day um, individuals with highly questionable character would be elevated to some status to receive a statue. Like that would never happen, right? I'm being sarcastic if you can't tell, right? I know we're all new to this, right? You may not be familiar with my style yet. That was a effort at sarcasm. Here, then, let me observe that it is only by degrees that history has attained the high pinnacle of her present position. In her infancy, she ran gossip-like from man to man, from hut to hut, from country to country, full of tattling tales, and so mixing together the truthful and the fabulous as to render it almost impossible to discover the gold amid the profusion of sand. For many ages, she persisted in these traditionary fables until the art of writing was invented, when she penned them down with the credulous simplicity of a child. But she was soon roused to the consciousness of her faults by observing the whispered doubts and satirical smiles of the sagacious Greeks as Herodotus publicly recited his charming tales of the ancient nations. Therefore, in Thucydides, oh man, I used to know these. Thucydides, we soon find her much wiser, and in many instances questioning the traditions which she herself had handed down from generation to generation. She began then to examine with scrupulous earnestness the evidences before her, as well in support of as also against an alleged fact, summed up the case before her with impartiality, and either passed sentence of immutability or set it aside in default of sufficient proof of its truth. Thus, she ascended to the highest earthly tribunal and reserved to herself the power to reward by her applause all those who have either signalized themselves by their benefactions conferred on mankind or by glorious deeds, and to punish by her condemnation those who have trampled upon humanity and proved themselves the enemies of mankind. Right. So it seems that in that paragraph he was taking note of the development of history, written history through time, and that um, there came a point at which those who were acknowledged as history writers um, uh, who wanted to take their subject of history more seriously acknowledged that okay, previous histories were filled with fables and uncertainties, and we need to move away from that. We need to give a more truthful account, not a fabulous account, but a more truthful account of history. And included in that would be um, condemning those who've trampled up on humanity and approving of those who have benefited mankind by glorious deeds. With the view of inciting a more eager desire to make yourselves familiar with history, I will relate the inducements that led me to its study and the course I have pursued in regard to it. Okay, so now we're going to get some personal history of our author and why it is that he came to be, I guess you could say, a lover of history. Why it is that he came to be someone who was concerned with history done right. My curiosity was first awakened by listening in my childhood to the conversation of intelligent and accomplished men, among whom my father was most eminent, on account of his great learning, admiration of history, and love of liberty. My views soon became enlarged, and I felt a burning thirst after knowledge. And while attempting to make myself thoroughly acquainted with the actions of mankind in ages gone by, I feasted with pleasure on the most glorious productions of the human mind. I have wandered with the immortal leader of the Israelites through the countries which cradled the human family. I have sought with Herodotus amid the Egyptian sages for gems of antiquity, with the admirable, I'll try it again, Thucydides, through Thucydides, I think. I have paid the tribute of admiration to the genius of Pericles and deeply deplored the internal struggles of the Greeks. I have, with the charming Livy, followed the great Carthaginian chieftain over the glaciers of the Alps to the battlefield of Cannae, and have stood aghast at the wonderful yet terrible triumphs of his tactics over a numerous army of the bravest people on earth. The infamous deeds of Roman tyrants, as recorded by Tacitus, have made my blood boil within me. And fain have I wished for the power to depict the tyrannical acts of more modern despots in the same vivid colors. By perusing Gibbon, I have acquainted myself with those centuries of darkness over which his brilliant genius has shed an inextinguishable light, and have smiled at the impotent attempts of pygmies to defame this glorious monument of historical architecture raised by the gigantic labor of this extraordinary man. Often, by the midnight lamp, have my eager eyes devoured the pages in which Johannes von Mueller has so admirably described immortal deeds in the cause of freedom. Many instructive and delightful hours have I spent with Machiavelli, the noble victim to republican principles, yet the subtle teacher of diabolical kingscraft. And that's, if you know anything about Machiavelli, that's pretty interesting description of him. With Hume, the keen judge of human nature and the most rational skeptic of philosophic historians. With Voltaire, the venomous scoffer at human follies, the blasphemer of the Christian religion, but at the same time a most powerful champion of the enfranchisement of the human mind. With Sismondi, the grave historian and generous patriot. With Ratek, the stout friend of freedom and able advocate of enlightened ideas. With the entertaining Becker, the learned Mosheim, the profound Bossuet, the sagacious Guizot, and the eloquent Geiger. You probably did better pronouncing those names than I did, but hmm. All right. So, it kind of feels like um, we'll see where he goes with this, but it kind of feels like Paul listing off all of his qualifications in the New Testament. Like, I've done all this. Let's see where he goes with this. But the more I read, the more I panted and thirsted after knowledge until my love of history became a predominant and ruling passion. I unhesitatingly sought after facts by wading through voluminous works, which were neither enlivened by wit, nor by eloquence, nor by sublime ideas, nor by subtle thoughts. But I soon hastened to refresh myself from the goblets which Chateaubriand, Madame de Staël, Brome, Michelet, Mignet, Macaulay, and many other bright geniuses have filled with intellectual nectar. Okay, we're going to skip a bit, not because it's not good to read what he's written there, but um, because, for sake of time, although I didn't mark this, so now I have to look for it. Let's see if I can search it. We know how this went last. If you want to see how my searching for things went last time, watch the previous episode. That's what I get again for not marking. Um, that word right here. I found it. Cool. All right, here we go. Nice. I'm I'm happy. You can tell I'm genuinely happy. I hope that makes you happy. But all right, we come to this. This is near the end of his text, right? So this is like a conclusion of the matter. Thus, the study of history, while enriching us with an inestimable knowledge of past generations, is also leading us to a better acquaintance with God. Clearly, are we taught that He extends His protecting hand over all His children, and that all are called into being to fulfill some wise purpose. You who think that chance, you who think that chance has brought forth all that exists, and that chance decides the fate of nations and of individuals, read history with becoming attention, and you will soon acknowledge your error and joyfully testify to the great truth that an intelligent, all wise, and benevolent being is the creator and ruler of the world. Yeah, I read all that to be able to read that to you. That's a magnificent sentence. 1848, published. Now think about it. It's 1859, right? 1859. Um, I think I got that right. Um, I don't want to get my history wrong, so let me um, check it. I'm asking the interwebs. Yeah, 1859. A pretty bad year in the whole flow of history. But 1859 is when Charles Darwin's On the Origin of Species is published, suggesting the means of natural selection for, as he said it, for the preservation of favored races in the struggle for life. Um, what's my point? Well, um, evolution doesn't start, the theory of evolution doesn't start in 1859. It predates that a lot of years before that. Seeing this author was aware that there were those who maybe the term, the label of evolution hadn't been applied yet, but there was a growing number of people who were thinking that everything came about by chance. And it's all by chance that the fate of nations and of individuals is determined. And see, he has an invested interest in those people, right? He's written this book, this history, as an effort to capture their attention so they can acknowledge the error and joyfully become testifiers to the great truth that there is an intelligent, all wise, and benevolent being who is the creator and ruler of the world. We in history classes today, right? We might put a lot of stock into um, at the end of the year, students can identify important historical dates. December 7, 1941. That was yesterday. Well, 1941 wasn't yesterday, but um, right. Um, whatever those dates might be, and we think, oh, good, we've accomplished our goals in history. This author wouldn't be impressed. Well, of course you should know those. Of course, because you carefully studied history for a higher purpose, right? His final exam at the end of his history class might be something asking about having studied universal history, write a defense of the truth that history testifies to an intelligent, all wise, and benevolent being as the creator and ruler of the world, and formulate an argument against those from history that hold to the view that everything exists because of chance, and chance is the decider of the fate of nations and of individuals. That sounds challenging, right? But you see, that's his goal and purpose of the study of history. That's history done right, is coming to this understanding that from the first to the present, all of history has been governed by an intelligent, all wise, and benevolent being, the one who's the creator and ruler of the world. And so, what does that mean for you, right? Well, it means there's a higher being to whom I am accountable. So, I better understand uh, what's my relationship with him? Is he smiling on me, or does he have a countenance of wrath towards me? And if he has a countenance of wrath towards me, how does that get corrected? Right? How does that, if I am at enmity with him, how do I become to be someone who lives at peace with him? How do I find happiness? Right? All right. Um, Perhaps we could look at another history. This is going to be a shorter reading from Westward Empire, or the Great Drama of Human Progress by E.L. Magoon, published in 1856. And let's see, we'll start with the second paragraph here. Not that that first paragraph isn't good, but sake of time, right? Right. So again, this is let's take a look here. This is Westward Empire, or the Great Drama of Human Progress. What a great title. It's the thing about these older books. They always had more than one title to their book. By E.L. Magoon. Apparently, I knew this as a young age because it just popped into my head, having more than one title. I remember that I wrote a short story and I called it Private Property or Stay Off the Grass. I just remember that. So apparently that was a thing for me to follow in their footsteps. But by E.L. Magoon. Okay. Um, to citizens who trust in Providence. Wait, what? Men who are true to humanity and patriots always hopeful of the Republic. This work is fraternally inscribed. How nice. Are you a citizen who trusts in Providence? Are you someone who is true to humanity? Are you a patriot that's always hopeful of the Republic? Okay, if you don't know what the Republic is, that's what you live in, is we should call ourselves the Republic of the United States of America. All right, let's go to that second paragraph. Artistic beauty, martial force, scientific invention, and universal amelioration have thus far illustrated with the great progressional law of successive predominance. And these, we believe, will ultimately be consummated in the supreme sway of perfect civilization. Okay, now, look, I know that I don't want to get into eschatological debate at this point. Okay, let's just acknowledge that the histories that we're reading here seem to have an optimistic view of the future. Okay. We are led to this view by taking a Catholic survey. This doesn't mean Roman Catholic Church. This means universal survey of every nation that has risen above the historical horizon. In which course we observe that all are alike the subjects of providence. You just, you just can't get away from it in our early textbooks. Um, if you're studying history, you're studying providence, right? I mean, it's like there's just no question about it. And I would simply ask, what are we studying today in history? Right? And I would challenge any Christian family, any Christian parents who come across this video, think about that. You're marching your children off to a government school. And is their study of history a study of providence or not? And I'm just going to suggest that it's the history of this nation that if you're going to study history, you're going to understand that you're learning about providence, that everybody, every nation is subject to the intelligent, all wise, and benevolent being that is the creator and ruler of the world. And I'm just going to suggest if they're not getting that in their history classes in the government schools today, there's a problem. We have a problem. And as young Christian parents with children of school age, if you're sending your children to that circumstance, there needs to be a corrective applied, right? You need to get them into an education where their history is leading them to a better understanding, a humility before the intelligent, all wise, and benevolent being who is the creator and ruler of the world. Sorry, we'll go on. In which course we observe that all, actually, I'm not sorry. I'm not sorry at all. I'm glad I said it. I'm glad the challenge has been placed before you. In which course we observe that all are alike the subjects of providence, each in its time and place being furnished with a part to act and a destiny to fulfill. Considered in this light, it may be reverently said that human history is a sacred drama of which God is the poet, each transitional age and act, humanity the hero, and the discriminating analyst a prophetical interpreter. Okay, that's quite a lot to say. I mean, when we look at history, humanity has been a disappointing hero too often. But it doesn't make it wrong. The hero of a story can struggle mightily with doing what is right, with doing the good. Doesn't make him not the hero of the story. Of course, ultimately, the hero of God's sacred drama, of which he is the poet, is Jesus Christ himself. He's the hero of history, right? And the rest of us who claim to be followers of his are, trying to keep up, praying that the Holy Spirit strengthens and enlivens us that we can in some way represent. All right. But this work is not so much the defense of a theory as it is the display of facts, the deduction of a general principle consequent thereupon. The travels of men and the trade currents of God move spontaneously and perpetually toward the West. Learn your history to understand what he's saying here. The opposite direction is always down east, while all healthful expansion and improvement is out west. Right? He's got to be referencing what were, you know, common phrases of his day. The Great Eastern Turnpike Canal or Railway was never built, nor has a Great Eastern ship yet launched on the deep. If the unnatural name has of late been given to a colossal craft, the misnomer is indicated by the fact that her first trip is appointed to be a western one, and to terminate in our most eastern harbor, where the most stupendous development of western commerce just begins. Right? He's getting very literal here about the whole business of history moving west, and that's healthy expansion moving west. All great enterprises by land and by sea have ever commenced in the East and augmented both their efficiency and worth through a continuous unfolding toward the setting sun. The latest race is evermore the best, and the last half of each great age is most prolific in progressive elements. And the west end of every great town throughout Europe and America is the growing end. Okay, that's a pretty interesting analysis of his day, right? But it becomes pretty significant when you look at the flow of history, right? Where do you see the most progress, not just in terms of industry and building, but in terms of ideas of government, pursuit of liberty, um, progress of Christianity, progress of Christianity in terms of enabling the people to better understand Christianity, the translating the Bible into a language that can be read by people, the preaching of sermons in the language of the people rather than in a language they don't understand, so they can't they're not understanding what's being said in their church service. They're thereby breaking the shackles of a kind of superstitious Christianity that had emerged, the development of medicine and hospitals and caring for the weak and the infirm. These were no longer people to just throw out of the town and throw onto the edge of the city and left to die, but there was some animating force that led people to be concerned and to care for such individuals. Ultimately, it comes to be um, something that in providential history we call the chain of Christianity. And the chain of Christianity that begins where Christ is crucified, buried, and resurrected. And we see that chain moving westward, right? Westward into Europe, to England, across the pond to America. Okay, let's see where I want to go next. Uh, Now I'm scrolling here, not because those aren't good paragraphs to read, it's just for sake of time. I think it's not too far away here. I may have to go to the search, and we know that so far I'm 50-50 on searches. My search last week. Well, watch the video and you'll see what happened if I searched last week. But um, oh no, I didn't find it. Let's see if we can um, you can watch me search for it here. Okay, that word shows up too often. We'll try again with a different word. Let's see, we need a, this word can't show up very often. Pronounce. I can't spell it. Ah, there it is right there. Okay. Um, I am 100% on searching in this episode. That's good. We'll start here. Um, In the present undertaking, the author proposes in general terms to remind the reader of the various masterpieces which the past has bequeathed, rather than minutely to describe their authors or criticize their merits. It is not our object to pronounce a judgment upon the characters and achievements of the great actors on the stage we survey, but simply to point out the manifest unity and advancement of the great drama as it proceeds. All minute details are omitted in order to present as distinctly as possible the main outlines. As we contemplate the vast patrimony of knowledge, whence it came and whither it leads, we watch the twilight on eastern hills as it brightens into midday and then goes flooding over the broad expanse of the west. The consecutive series of historical events, though they transpire wide apart and extend through a long lapse of ages, are never absolutely separated, but in the presence of the great Father are intimately joined in a sublime association and mutually cooperate for the highest good of the greatest number. Different currents may seem to flow from the most diverse sources and in opposite directions, but they are all tributaries to one centralizing channel wherein flows forward forever the accumulating aggregate of human fortunes under the divine control. Now we're going to stop there. Not that the rest of what he has written there is not worth reading, but because of time, right? But I mean, that's it's just amazing. The providential view that these history writers held. Mm. All right, so I had some more to read here, but I think I'll just jump to the final one that I wanted to read. Um, that one. Um, let's see. Let's go to George Park Fisher. His work. Just yeah, George Park Fisher. Um, and I'm not going to read everything that I had planned to read here. Let's see if we can pick that up. And I may have to do another search here to get us to the spot where I'm going to start. Let's do that. Let's do inscrutable. You can't use that word very often, right? I skipped right past it. There we go. Okay, so let me start here and we'll read a portion. This will be where we end today. Of the inscrutable blending of human freedom with a preordained design, Guizot says, man advances in the execution of a plan which he has not conceived and of which he is not even aware. He is the free and intelligent artificer of a work which is not his own. Conceive a great machine, the design of which is centered in a single mind, though its various parts are entrusted to different workmen separated from and strangers to each other. No one of them understands the work as a whole, nor the general result which he concurs in producing, but everyone executes with intelligence and freedom by rational and voluntary acts the particular task assigned to him, right? So think about that. Um, if you want to get a better understanding of that, go on YouTube and search up I pencil, and you'll find a really interesting video that talks about um, how pencils get made. And it's very much that. Let's skip here and we'll read this section, the meaning of history. A thoughtful student can hardly fail to propose to himself the question, what is the meaning of history? Why is this long drama with all that is noble and joyous in it and with its abysses of sin and misery enacted at all? It is only a partial answer that one can hope to give to this grave inquiry, for the designs of Providence cannot be fully fathomed. But among the ends in view, the moral training of mankind stands forth with a marked prominence. The deliverance of the race from moral evil and error, and the building up of a purified society enriched with all the good that belongs to the ideal of humanity and exalted by fellowship with God, is not only an end worthy in itself, but it is the end towards which the onward movement of history is seen to be directed. Hence, a central place in the course of history belongs to the life and work of Jesus Christ. Again, I would call out to um, those Christian parents who have children and you're thinking about what to do about their education. You've got them involved in their education at government schools in particular. A central place in the course of history belongs to the life and work of Jesus Christ. In the course of history that your children will learn in government schools, is there going to be given a central place to the life and work of Jesus Christ? No more satisfactory solution of this problem of the significance of history has ever been offered than that brought forward by the Apostle Paul in Acts 17:27, where he says that the nations of men were assigned to their places on earth, and their duration as well as boundaries determined, that they should seek the Lord, if haply they might feel after him and find him. I mean, is that central to your thinking about what a study of history should lead someone to? Right? I mean, is that right? When that Christian parent um, packs up little Johnny's Christian lunch and sends him out the front door to get onto that big yellow bus that swallows him up and takes him off to um, the government school, can you truly be thankful that knowing that when little Johnny does his history lesson for the day, it will bring him to a place where he understands the central place of the life and work of Jesus Christ in history, and that it will inspire him to seek the Lord, who is not far from any, that little Johnny might find the Lord. What can we say? We can say history is not done right in the government schools. Maybe it's not done right in many Christian schools. I don't know. But I've already given you a number of authors of history textbooks from the history of this country who thought it important enough to include in their history textbook so that little Johnny would know what's the real purpose of studying history. Yeah, there's a lot of stuff that we gain, knowledge we gain, and things that we learn, and stories we're impressed by, and stories that break our hearts, and all of that. But what we're really about is coming to know that intelligent, all-wise, benevolent creator, sustainer of the world. And to see that all of history points to that one central event, the life and work of Jesus Christ. That's history done right. So, how are you doing history? What are your children experiencing as part of their study of history? Right? If you're someone who's attending a college class, a history class in college, are you willing to? Are you emboldened to? Could you have confidence in the Lord and His Holy Spirit within you to express such a thought in the discussions in your history class? That while others are talking about uh, the mundanity of just human chance happenings or whatever, that you might boldly speak out and say, well, I really see God's hand at work here because of maybe someday on one of these episodes, I'll tell you a story about my college experience. Um, but no, this is, I don't know how smart we think we are. A lot of that is chronological snobbery. We think because we came after, we are necessarily smarter. But if in all the history studying we do, um, we don't we don't find God and we don't come to know him better, and we don't see more clearly that all of history before the cross points to the cross, and all of history after the cross is because of the cross, we're not really studying history. We're not that smart. And that needs to change. We need a return to history done right. And so that's I flatter myself with the hope that the videos that I would produce would help someone to maybe come to a conviction that, yeah, I need to do history right. And these videos have helped, maybe. I had another thought, but I lost that thought as I rambled on there. So, oh no, I remember what it was now. um, when I mentioned that these authors seem to have this optimistic view of the future, if you want to see more evidence of that, and I might suggest evidence that the kind of history that we're reading about here was actually put into practice and studied and became part of the thinking of a particular generation in the history of this country. Join me for where we're going next in the midweek study, right? Because we're going to be looking at a couple of election sermons. We're sticking with election sermons. We're going to look at a couple of election sermons, and you might be surprised at the optimistic view of the future that seems to have been prevalent before and at the time of the founding of this nation. Just a teaser for you to join me Wednesday night for midweek study. Join us tomorrow night for the Lantern's Quest. We continue our series of exploring the sketchbook of Christ and going through the Gospel of Mark. Pastors David Barrett and Lucas Bombach join me for that, and it's always informative, educational, and inspiring to hear their insights as we walk through the Gospel of Mark. And then finish off your week with Random Cast. who knows what'll come up on Random Cast because it's random cast, you see. And so join me for that at the end of the week. Thanks for viewing this video. Whenever you viewed it, please, do the YouTube thing, right? Like if you're not subscribed, subscribe and hit that notification bell, as they say, so that you can, see when our new videos are coming, our live streams are coming on. Leave a comment, ask a question, um, correct me, right? Tell me the real pronunciation of some of those names I stumble over, whatever the case. Love to have comments and be able to interact with you that way as well. So again, thanks for joining us, being a part of this podcast, and plan on joining us through the week as you're able to for the podcast we have for the reading this week. Join us next week for more history done right, as we try to do history right, as we've talked about. So, yeah, thanks for being a part. And I'm trying to get better at closing my podcast so I don't just, cut myself off, as you may have noticed if you've watched any other videos. So we're going to do better at that. Have a good night. Thanks for being part of History Done Right. And join us again. Like and share the video as you're able.